Antonia Voigt, who is going to talk about UK universities and their planning to become sustainable universities. I'd like to welcome everybody. We have a few people that are online as well. For those who are online, when you're not speaking, kindly just have your mic on mute. We're going to have Antonia give her presentation for 30 minutes, and thereafter we have a discussant who will also share some views in about 10 minutes, and thereafter we'll invite people around to make comments, questions, etc. So thank you very much for joining us, Antonia. I'll just read her bio. So Antonia Voigt is a final year doctoral student at the University of Education, at the School of Education at the University of Bristol in the United Kingdom. She was born in Germany and has since lived in France, the United Arab Emirates, and the UK. Her main PhD advisor is Professor Leon Tickley. Antonia's academic interests are sustainable development in higher and secondary education. Over the past 5 years, she has been teaching and researching on topics including global education policies, access and quality issues in education, and the impact of sustainable development goals. Today, she will share her findings on how UK universities are planning to become sustainable. So over to you, Antonia, for your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction and for having me today. I'm delighted to share my doctoral research, which is on UK universities and how they plan to become sustainable. And the presentation, or the title of today's presentation, is Taking Stock of UK Universities' Strategies for Sustainability. And I'm particularly interested in if these strategies are ambitious plans to change for the future, or if they're rather half-hearted commitments. To follow on from the introduction, I'd like to give you a little bit more background on where I come from in terms of an academic career. So I started with a Master's of Arts in International Business Management. And during this degree, I became particularly interested in the management of higher education institutions. I followed that up with a Master's of Science at the University of Edinburgh, which was in comparative education and international development. Here, I developed an interest in the role of universities in national and international development for sustainable futures. Between 2020 and 2021, which was sort of at the height of the pandemic in the UK, I was a research assistant for a project on access to secondary education in the Asia-Pacific region and worked on educational projects that were focused on developing and designing sustainable secondary schools. When I began my PhD in education in September 2021, I brought together the three main streams of research interests that I had developed during my previous degrees, and that was management, higher education, and sustainability. And I bring these three streams together to study how UK universities plan to become sustainable as organisations. To contextualize my research a little bit, I would like to reference a sentence from a relatively well-known TV series that in the UK. And this series is called Kunk on Earth. It's a mockumentary, and the main character in this mockumentary discusses humanity and our history. And in the closing scene of the series, she looks ahead to the future of humanity and says, "Now in the present moment, humankind sits impaled on a crossroads, facing an uncertain future. Will we rise to the challenge of climate change? This question of whether we will rise to the challenge of climate change is where my research picks up by looking at the role of universities in the UK. UK universities hold unique positions in national and international debate on climate change and sustainability. Through their core work in research and teaching and their ability to bring people together, they play pivotal roles in finding solutions to global challenges such as climate change and sustainability. Previous research on this topic has shown that UK universities are beginning to address sustainability through, as you might expect, their research and their teaching. But they're also changing as organizations, or how they operate as organizations. Yet our evidence on how they undergo this organizational change for sustainability has been sporadic and unfortunately largely inconclusive. My PhD lays the groundwork to change this narrative. Understanding if universities are rising to the challenge of climate change consists of two broad sequential steps. Firstly, we need to understand how universities plan to become sustainable. And then we can look at how universities implement these plans. My research tackles the first of these two big questions. Over the past year, I conducted the first comprehensive stock-taking of sustainability strategies across the whole UK university sector. I used two main types of data to understand how universities plan to become sustainable. Firstly, I carried out interviews with sustainability managers across 24 institutions in the UK. And secondly, I analysed the strategic documents for sustainability for 140 institutions. For the purpose of this study, a university in the UK is defined as a public institution with over 9,000 students. In today's presentation, I will share with you the key highlights of my study. My findings have already provided a clear basis for universities and their critics to engage in discussions on how to improve the process of planning change for sustainability. In strategic management and organizational change theories, the process of planning change is commonly viewed as consisting of four main components. Before I go into my findings on these four components, let's talk about what they look like in theory. So the process generally starts with university management realizing that something is changing. This might be an increase in students' interest to eliminate single-use plastic, or the need to comply with government policies to reduce carbon emissions. Assuming that the university management identifies the need to respond to these internal, external, or public discourse, sustainability as a term needs to be defined to be tailored to the institution's needs. So is it only about environmental issues, the natural environment in particular, or does it also include social and economic ideas? The third component looks at how sustainability is integrated into the core work of institutions. The core work of UK universities can be broken down into four main types of activities: research and teaching, institutional partnerships with other organizations, local communities, or even international relationships. And the fourth main activity is the operations of the physical campus. The final aspect that university management needs to plan is how the institution will identify that it has successfully become more sustainable. Now, let me share my findings on these four components. Well, firstly, all universities have identified the need to respond to discourse on sustainability, which is a great starting point. The next part next component rather to look at is how do they define sustainability now that they have identified the need to respond to public, political, or internal discourse. When looking at how universities define sustainability, I've identified two key patterns. The first one is that the definitions of sustainability focus overwhelmingly on the natural environment. In over 70% of cases, sustainability is understood as protecting and restoring the natural environment. The central concern of this definition is the reduction of carbon emissions. For the remaining 30% of institutions, however, sustainability goes beyond environmental concerns to also include social and occasionally economic or financial ideas. The second key finding is that while sustainability policies and strategies are regularly updated, almost all conceptualizations do not reflect up-to-date thinking on what it means to be sustainable. One of the few comprehensive definitions that I have found is used by an institution called Arts University London. In their sustainability strategy, the institution acknowledges the inherent complexity between human development and the natural environment. This institution describes sustainability not as an environmental issue, but as a project of cultural recovery, in which issues of climate, racial, and social justice intersect to address structural inequalities. The next component in the process of planning change for sustainability is about how the idea of sustainability is integrated into the existing organizational structure. Across the UK university sector, I've identified 4 types of integration: singular, plural, all silo, and holistic. The first type of integration, called singular, is used when institutions plan to bring sustainability into their operational activities on campus. So this could mean that they, for example, plan to reduce waste, protect biodiversity, or eliminate single-use plastic. This is the narrowest type of integration and found in about 12% of the UK university sector. Plural is the second type of integration. Here, institutions plan to embed sustainability into their operations on campus, but also their research and teaching activities. So this might mean that they teach courses or offer courses such as fashion and sustainability or finance and sustainability. This type of integration is proposed by about 16% of institutions. The all-silo integration approach is characterized by the intention to bring sustainability into the 4 main university activities or silos: operations, teaching, research, and institutional partnerships. This is the most commonly expressed integration type and found in about 55% of institutional strategies for sustainability. The final type of integration I call holistic. Institutions that propose this type of integration recognize that to become sustainable, they need to do more than just bring sustainability into their core activities. It requires a shift in organizational culture. And these institutions make the conscious choice to bring in sustainability into their core values and or make it a strategic pillar of their plans for the future. Holistic integration is about as common as the plural type of integration, with about 17%. The final component that university management considers when planning their transformation for sustainability is how to measure that they are successfully on track to become sustainable. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to gauge how universities measure their progress for sustainability. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, while it can be assumed that all universities are measuring if they're on track, only 50% of institutions actually publicly publish these progress reports. And secondly, when data is available on their progress, there is a lack of standardization. For example, all universities in the UK have the ambition to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, which includes, for example, carbon dioxide. When reporting their reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, some institutions include what is called the direct emissions. Direct emissions include those produced through heating and electricity. In contrast, other universities include their direct, but also their indirect emissions. And indirect emissions are caused by, for example, business travel. The lack of data and standardization applies in particular to 3 of the 4 nations in the UK, and that's England, Northern Ireland, and Wales. In Scotland, the 4th nation in the UK, has a slightly better situation. In this nation, the universities are required by law to report at least some of their progress using a standardized form and report it to a centralized organization, which is called the Sustainable Scotland Network. And this organization makes these reports on sustainability publicly available on an annual basis. When we talk about sustainability, you might quite naturally think about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And the 17 SDGs are designed to promote a more comprehensive understanding of the intricacies of sustainability, and they're designed to encourage organizations such as universities to work collaboratively towards ensuring sustainable futures for all. And about 30% of universities in the UK are drawing on or aligning their organizational transformation for sustainability with the SDGs. And through interviews with sustainability managers across the UK, I've identified that the SDGs can make it easier for universities to become sustainable. And there are 3 main benefits I would like to highlight. Firstly, sustainable development is a complex topic, and the SDGs can help to break down this complexity and allow sustainability managers in universities to view environmental, social, human, economic sustainability as separate but also interconnected ideas that need to be addressed simultaneously. The second advantage that the SDGs can bring to institutions is that, as we just saw, measuring progress can be really difficult for universities. But the SDGs are a tool that universities can utilize to think about qualitative as well as quantitative measures of progress for sustainability and different types of sustainability. And thirdly, sustainability is still an emerging topic, and understandings of what it might mean or different definitions of what it might mean can coexist simultaneously. And that can make it more difficult for universities to collaborate. But the SDGs allow a shared framework through which institutions can co-create opportunities for collaboration under one umbrella idea. However, the SDGs are by no means perfect, and they can present, or they can hinder the process of planning change for sustainability in institutions. And there are 3 challenges I want to highlight. Firstly, some institutions choose only to address a selection of SDGs, whereas one interviewee called it they cherry pick a number of SDGs. And the SDGs that are chosen by the institutions are usually where the institution already has existing strengths and experience. But this is counteracting the purpose of the SDGs, which is to represent the complexity of sustainable development. So these institutions are basically continuing what they've done before and are not fulfilling the true meaning of sustainable development. The second challenge that the SDGs can pose is that they can be viewed as a tick box exercise, or which is also called as a post hoc mapping. Post hoc mapping means that sustainability plans are decided without thinking about the SDGs. And then after the sustainability plan has been created, the ideas proposed are mapped against the SDGs, which is contrary to how it should be, where the SDGs guide the development of the sustainability plan. And finally, a more generic critique that several sustainability managers have raised is that the SDGs are too broad and unspecific for them to be effective in universities in the UK. As a result, existing work that already happens at the institution can easily be mapped against the SDGs, but they don't necessarily nudge the institutions to fundamentally reconsider how the organization works and that it is currently economically, socially, and environmentally unsustainable. So when looking at the whole of the strategic approach of, well, are universities responding to environmental, external, internal, or political discourse? How are they defining sustainability, integrating it, and measuring it? You might ask, who is leading the movement for sustainability in higher education in the UK? And it is not the institutions we commonly think of when we say the best UK universities like Oxford, Cambridge, University College of London, or St Andrews. Through correlating institutional characteristics such as reputation, size, and income statistics with universities' commitment to sustainability, I identified that the degree of commitment to sustainability is independent of these institutional characteristics of reputation, size, and income. A diverse set of institutions have the most up-to-date definitions on sustainability and use the holistic integration type. These institutions are young and old, they're teaching intensive and research intensive, and internationally well-reputed and less well-reputed. But I would like to highlight two circumstances that make it more likely for a university in the UK to be a leader. And firstly, that's political context. The UK consists of these 4 different nations who each have their own, in part, their own legal frameworks. And these devolved legal frameworks can make a huge difference. So, for example, in Scotland, the Sustainable Scotland Network, or in Wales, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, are external factors that nudge universities to engage more proactively with what sustainability can mean and how they should respond to the climate emergency. And secondly, internal factors have a significant role. Factors such as institutional history, but also if sustainability is a research interest for a significant population at the institution, can make a difference. According to interviewees across the whole UK, both of these internal and external factors have made it easier to plan for the complexity of sustainability and engage the student community and staff community to be proactive about sustainability. To conclude, I would like to draw out 3 takeaway messages. Firstly, going back to the title of the presentation, are UK universities' strategies for sustainability half-hearted commitments or ambitious plans? Overall, about 80% of institutions make half-hearted commitments, but 20% of institutions are rising to the challenge of climate change. They set out sustainability plans that are proactively pushing our understanding of what it means to be sustainable and lead by example through intending to embed sustainability holistically. And secondly, as I pointed out at the beginning, my research looks at universities' plans for sustainability. Previous research on the implementation of sustainability is useful and important, but to give change agents the knowledge to better advocate for actions, we need to understand how universities plan for sustainability and then implement these plans to understand if it's a planned change, an emergent change, or that they're just lucky in how they have become sustainable. And finally, the SDGs can play a significant role in shaping how universities plan for sustainability. It can shape comprehensive understandings and encourage holistic integration to be more effective. However, the SDGs can also be a smokescreen. If university management does not want to change for sustainability because it is seen as too expensive or too risky, aligning existing work with the SDGs can create the illusion of change, even though business as usual is continued. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Antonia. At this point, I would like to invite the discussant, Dr. Kura Masungo, who is a postdoctoral research fellow here at the Human Development Higher Education Research Group, University of the Free State. Dr. Masungo, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Suzyika. Thank you very much, Antonio, for the wonderful, interesting, thought-provoking presentation. It's quite interesting considering that the topic of sustainable development is actually making waves, and considering that many institutions, many universities and governments have got policies to address issues of sustainability. And your presentation comes in time, and it's quite interesting in that it brings the global perspective on sustainable development within universities in the United Kingdom as well. And considering that within your context, it is groundbreaking research, as you suggested, that research in universities on sustainable development actually point towards what you refer to as likely inconclusive, and in terms of translating policy into action as well. And I think I've got comments or questions regarding your presentation. And the first one is, what would be the reason behind universities' failure in adopting the widest definition of sustainability, as you suggested in your presentation? That is the first question. And then my second question, you also spoke of challenges that are related to SDGs. Apart from those challenges, what other challenges are associated with putting policies into action? And then the other one is, during your research, you also mentioned that you did document analysis and you conducted interviews. I'm interested in knowing what those policies have to say regarding student well-being in relation to sustainability as well. And My last question is, it's quite interesting that you mentioned that you drew from theories from higher education, theories from management and sustainability. What is your definition of sustainability, or how do you conceptualize sustainability issues? I think thank you.
Thank you.
All right, yeah. So Antonia, you could go ahead and respond to Kura's comments and questions, and then we'll also invite more questions from the group.
I made notes on the question, but in case I misunderstand the question, do let me know. So the first question was, what are the reasons? I think I've missed out the first. What are the reasons behind? What was the question?
Okay, failure by universities in adopting what is the definition of sustainability?
Right. Yes. The reasons why they fail to adopt the widest definition. An excellent question. I think I would point out that it is more complicated than one thinks when thinking about the definitions. And two reasons behind why institutions tend to go for more narrow definitions or the environmental definitions is that it is expensive and it is uncertain and it is risky to adopt wider definitions. So in particular, I'm thinking of an interview with an institution in England, and the sustainability manager who I was talking to was very keen on actually adopting the definition that is very wide and includes environmental, social, and financial sustainability. But when he proposed to adopt this wider definition, the higher senior management team said, we don't have the resources to invest in environmental and social sustainability at the same time. We need to make a choice. And the choice came down to what's the most that we can achieve with the resources available, but also seen as the most urgent in the view of the public, and the thing that we can control the most. So environmental sustainability on campus by reducing waste, reducing water consumption, installing solar panels, was seen as something that the institution can control easily. If, in contrast, you said social sustainability is also equally important, which it of course is, the institution would need to start thinking about, well, are we, for example, paying our staff well enough for the work that they're doing? And this is currently a very hot topic in the UK, where staff are continuously going on strike because they're not being paid enough for the work that they need to do. So engaging in the social sustainability would bring up these topics more to the forefront, and universities don't want to go there. I would say that's definitely one of the reasons. And the other reason is the uncertainty aspect. Environmental sustainability is easily quantifiable, measurable, and actionable. Social sustainability or financial sustainability are less well understood for universities, so they tend to shy away. It's more of institutions go for reactive approaches rather than proactive approaches to defining sustainability. So that would be the answer to your first question. Another question was, what do policies say about student well-being? Student well-being in the UK is important, but it is not tied to sustainability. They're seen more as two different aspects of how universities operate. That being said, institutions that do holistic integration, where sustainability becomes part of the values and a strategic pillar of plans for the future, there are connections between sustainability ambitions and student well-being. But I wouldn't say that it is of significant concern across the UK university sector. The one time that an institution does pay close attention to this aspect is a Scottish university who are doing holistic integration, and they have had a history in becoming sustainable for over 25 years, which is significantly longer than most universities in the UK, who tend to have an engagement with sustainability around 5 years. And this institution has sort of evolved from thinking about environmental and social sustainability in relation to the outside community, and is now facing or prioritizing the social sustainability on their own campus. So things like improving contracts for staff, for teaching staff or research staff, but also thinking in particular post-pandemic about how universities are or how universities should be a safe and supportive environment for students to grow as individuals and get educational degrees. Your other question was about challenges related to SDGs and turning policies into actions. Is that correct?
No, it's about challenges that are associated with putting policies into action. You mentioned the SDGs. So I was asking, apart from SDGs, what are other challenges that are associated with the universities implementing the policies?
Okay. Well, the first one is that most people don't know about the policies. So that makes integration really difficult, or putting the policies into action really difficult. Policies in the UK context, policies are really important in order to create the impression or the feeling of a safe work environment. And they guide and structure how universities operate and individuals can interact. Sustainability policies are currently more ideas on paper than guidance for actions. So an example from my own university in Bristol, my faculty is planning, for example, a conference. And in theory, the university has a policy that if you're hosting an event at the university, you shouldn't be using single-use plastic. You should only use local catering organizations, and you should encourage participants to use public transportation to come to the event. I know that because I've studied the policy. If I hadn't studied the policy as part of my research, I wouldn't know that those were requirements I should be paying attention to when organizing an event. This is not an isolated incident, but more an illustration of the kind of gap between the theoretical ideas of sustainability, which are usually designed by experts on sustainability, and then taking that large leap to actually implement it by those who are already potentially overworked, potentially not interested in sustainability, and just have other priorities. So I would say that that's the biggest challenge with putting policies into actions. And your final question, which I love, what is my definition of sustainability? People like to ask me that question, and I always like to not return the favor, but say that in research alone, in 2015, so almost 8 years ago, there were over 300 definitions of sustainability, which illustrates just how diverse and multidimensional our approaches to conceptualizing sustainability can be. And I'm sure by now there are more than 300 definitions. So my definition, I think, focuses in particular on regenerative, because that's something that current thinking around sustainability, particularly in my research field, doesn't pay attention to. When we think about sustainability, the emphasis is on the sustaining, but we're actually in many aspects already beyond the point of being able to sustain how we live, but we should be thinking about regenerating. So that, yeah, if we were to sustain how we are, we wouldn't actually be able to continue for much longer. But if we regenerate, we might be able to be getting closer to what we hope to be sustainable development. I hope that's good enough for now as a definition.
All right, thank you for the responses. At this point, I will invite questions, comments. I see we already have one comment from someone online, but for now, maybe we could have question, comments from there. All right, yes, please.
Thanks, Antonia. Mine's actually a question for clarification. So you looked at 140 university statements and you did 24 interviews. Can you say a little bit about what made up those 24? So which parts of the UK, what kinds of universities, and why those 24? And how you're going to extrapolate from those 24 to a wider narrative and align it with your 140. So if you could say a bit about the methods as well. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think maybe we could have a few more questions, or would you rather go with one?
I think I'll go with one, so I can remember
right.
the question.
Okay.
Great question. So why the 24, or how did I come to the 24? Okay, so what was important for me was to capture the diversity of the UK university sector. And I grouped institutions according to four categories. The first one was, where in the UK are they located? England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, or Wales? Then for Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, which have very small populations of institutions. So in the Northern Ireland, it's only 2. In Wales, it's 8. And in Scotland, it's 15. For those 3 devolved nations, I approached every institution for interviews. And for England, which had over 100 institutions, I only approached a selection of institutions which were, I only approached a selection of institutions. I'll stop there. So the other criteria, apart from devolved nations in the UK, where how old is the institution? So is it an ancient university? Is it a technological? Is it a post-1992 or a plate glass institution, which are sort of broad categories of institutions in the UK. And the next criteria was I grouped universities based on their sustainability commitment as expressed in the strategic documents. So did they have a low commitment, a medium commitment, or a high commitment, which were a reflection on how, not elaborative, but how extensively they plan for sustainability. So really complicated to explain it. For all universities in the UK, I categorized institutions according to sustainability commitment and the age of the institution. But regardless of that categorization, I approached everyone in Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, and did then random sampling in each of the categories for England, because England has over 100 institutions. And then it was whoever responded, that's who became part of the 24. So the representation across the 4 UK nations, in Northern Ireland, it's 50%, in Wales, it's 40%. In Scotland, it's, I think, 50%, and in England, it's smaller because it is a larger population, and I think 12%, but equal representation across the ages of universities and the sustainability commitment that I categorized based on the strategic documents.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks, Antonia. I've got 2 small questions. The one is with regard to the policy and the plan. I wondered if you had from that any sense of the institution working towards some kind of future imagining, or is the plan just for now, or is there a time span? Are they when are they planning for? What sort of time period? Is it for the here and now, or does it have some kind of extension into the future? And then a second question, just for clarification, really, I think if I understood you correctly, you said that the link with sustainability planning was not directly related to institutions with high reputation, size, and income. In other words, the sort of big ones. And I wondered, when you mentioned in response to Kura's question that their reason for not adopting the broad understanding of sustainability had to do with lack of resources and choice. And I wondered whether that choice between picking an environmental focus or a more holistic focus had anything to do with driving their reputation. It sounds almost contradictory, but I wondered whether that choice was made in driving a ranking or reputation for those institutions.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you. So the first question, are these plans sort of for now, or how long are they planning into the future? Most sustainability plans are 5-10 years. Some institutions say that this 5 to 10 year plan is part of a 20-year or 30-year strategy, or vision, and that it's sort of the first building block from which a second one will come, which will work towards a 30-year strategy, vision. I think one thing I would want to highlight is that in many cases, sustainability is seen as a goal rather than an emergent property or process that is part of how the organization will evolve in the future. But it's sort of, especially in environmental sustainability terms, seen as we reach net zero. And then that's as far as we're going to think for now, or potentially that is the end for some institutions. But it's not, more often than not, it's seen as something you plan for in 10 years, within 10 years, and then we don't worry about what comes next, which I think is quite interesting, given how sustainability or climate change in particular is rapidly changing how we live, and we need to begin to think a bit more in terms of long-term plans rather than just short-term plans. Your second point on correct me if I'm misrepresenting your question, but your question is whether sustainability can drive reputation?
Whether the choice they make as to how they define sustainability is orientated towards their reputation.
Towards their reputation. Yes and no. For some institutions, they choose to have sustainability as their USP, or their unique selling point within what is a relatively competitive market in the UK. And those institutions would argue that yes, sustainability, we do sustainability with an intention for it to drive our reputation, through which we hope to get more students, or at least attract students away from other institutions towards us. This applies to internationally well-reputed and old universities and large institutions, but also to institutions that actually just focus on local recruitment within the UK and not international student recruitment, where reputation comes in much more than within the UK. Other institutions would say sustainability, being environmentally sustainable, has nothing to do with our reputation, but it's more of anticipating or preempting negative backlashes from the public. So if institutions aren't addressing carbon emissions, for example, or try to reduce plastic on campus, there is a fear that that would result in backlash from local communities or students, which has happened in a couple of institutions when thinking about meat in catering and canteen food. So these institutions take it as a more reactive, while others also take it as a proactive way of improving recruitment, improving reputation. Yeah.
All right, I think we're almost out of time, but just in case there's any, so yeah, maybe we'll have one question, and then are you able to see the question in the chat?
Yes, I can see the question in the chat. Shall I do the one in the chat first?
Yes, so you can go ahead and do the one in the chat, then we can quickly conclude.
Did any universities you interview mention about how their sustainability policies work towards reflecting on the type of knowledge they produce, educate, including decolonizing knowledge? Great question. Short answers, no, they don't. There are attempts to, for example, think about historic carbon emissions from the past. So most sustainability strategies look into the future and how carbon emissions against a baseline from 2018, for example, are continuously being reduced or are planned to be reduced, but some institutions do want to go a little further and think about past emissions or the emissions that were caused through the building of the institutions or the building of the houses and lecture halls potentially 200, 400 years ago. In terms of teaching, there is not that much. I would say that some teaching staff and researchers are pushing for things like decolonization to be included in discussions on sustainability, but that's more of a bottom-up approach to thinking about sustainability and planning for it, rather than something that comes top-down. Does that help? Great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, all right, great. So Chris, maybe a quick one. And then...
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I think mine is linked to maybe the last question that was on chat. But I wanted to say, I think from your literature, you identified that around 70% of your findings, the sustainability is about the environment, right? And though it's a bit broader, but then in terms of the universities in the UK, how do they consider SDG number 4 of quality education, beside the issue of environment, which might be broader, even going beyond the universities, and also considering that the universities are much into teaching, learning, and research. So how do they relate themselves to SDG number 4 of quality education?
I could write a whole paper on that. SDG 4. Conscious of time, I will keep it short and say SDG 4 is something that in universities don't necessarily feel addresses or speaks to them. It is more viewed as something that they can help others achieve. So for example, in universities or sustainability managers in particular, see their role in helping local schools achieve SDG 4, rather than thinking about how SDG 4 should reflect on the organization as a whole for the university itself. In the School of Education, which I have most experience in, SDG 4 of course plays a role, but only again in what is being taught and what is being researched, rather than in how the School of Education functions as an organization. So is, for example, the PhD program designed to encourage lifelong learning, which is something you would associate with SDG 4. There is no direct evidence that would suggest that. Does that help? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Antonia, for coming through, and we wish you all the very best completing your project. And thank you everyone for participating and those that were online. All right, so I think that's where we end. All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.